A Charlie Brown Christmas aired for the first time December 9th, 1965. That's 56 years ago. More than half the homes with TV sets in the U.S. tuned in that night, more than 15 million in all. It ended up the number 2 show of the week, and it went on to win an Emmy. But the first time they saw it as a proposal, most TV executives didn't like it. They said it didn't stand a chance. Their main concern was that it was too religious, and Linus's monologue was way over the top. In the end, A Charlie Brown Christmas was only made and put on the air because advertising executives from Coca-Cola really liked it, really wanted it, and put pressure on CBS to make it happen. Although its top official said no one would watch, CBS eventually took Coca-Cola's money and reluctantly brought the Peanuts gang to the silver screen. Well, CBS went on to run it in primetime for the next 35 years in a row before selling the broadcast rights to ABC. On Apple TV or on PBS on December 19th, Linus will once again step into the spotlight and deliver the most memorable, and for some, the most controversial scene, quoting straight from the Bible, from the old King James. I bring you good tidings of great joy, which shall be to all people. For unto you is born this day in the city of David a Savior, which is Christ the Lord. This week we're going to focus on 2 tiny but huge words in there, is and the. They're central to the story and to world history, but they're so small they can easily get overlooked. Did you notice them? Is Christ the Lord. Christopher Shea was the voice of Linus. He was 8 at the time. No one could have imagined his most famous role from 40 years of acting would be reciting those words from the book of Luke. Peter Robbins, the voice of Charlie Brown, called it one of the most amazing moments ever in animation. Is Christ the Lord. To feel the full weight of those words, we need to look at how Luke started his report that eventually led up to those words. These are the first words from Luke. Many people have set out to write accounts about the events that have been fulfilled among us. They used eyewitness reports circulating among us from the early disciples. Having carefully investigated everything from the beginning, I also have decided to write a careful account for you, most honorable Theophilus, so you can be certain of the truth of everything you were taught. It doesn't seem as though Luke took this research project on because he wanted to defend Christianity, nor is there any indication he was out to squash the story of Jesus. Luke was a Gentile, so it wasn't like he had anything to prove or disprove from a Jewish perspective. He seems more like a deep-thinking skeptic who had set out to meticulously explore the spectacular stories that were going around. In his letter to the Colossians, Paul referred to Luke as the beloved doctor. So I wonder if all the stories of healings might have caught his attention. Or what about a virgin having a baby? Or even the resurrection? Well, whatever it was, something grabbed Dr. Luke's heart and mind, and he tackled this massive project. The book named after him and Acts were like a 2-volume set, and something of that size was virtually unheard of at the time. It took almost 30 years of research, investigation, interviews, and writing. Angry, anti-Jesus feelings had spread across the Roman Empire by the time he finished writing, and releasing it would have at least put his career and reputation in jeopardy, if not his life. But undeterred, Luke poured himself into the project and then carefully wrote every word, including a seemingly small one. Is Christ. After all the interviews, all the investigation, all the research, Luke was convinced it was an unshakable fact. He was so convinced he was willing to die for it by putting it in writing. Not only did he believe an angel had given a spectacular birth announcement to a pack of shepherds, Luke believed what the angel had said. The baby is Christ. Now, Christ was not like Jesus' last name. His name was not like Jesus Christ, like mine is Len Kinzel. At the time, for the average Jew, including shepherds, the word for Christ referred to the highest ranking office anywhere. Someone wouldn't just be appointed to it, but anointed for it. In the Jewish mind, the highest rank was a king, so this was quite literally the King of Kings. Is Christ the Lord? Not a, the. In most English versions, the word a appears earlier in the angel's announcement. Unto you is born this day in the city of David a Savior. Well, the word for a wasn't originally in there. It would have been more literally like Savior, born. In the Jewish way of thinking, there could only be one Savior. But the thought of the Savior being born in a barn to unwed teenagers would have been absurd. But that's precisely what the shepherds were asked to believe and what Luke set out to verify. And in the end, he wrote, the Savior, the Christ King, the Lord. Saying or writing that was controversial 2,000 years ago. It was controversial in a cartoon 56 years ago. It is controversial today. It likely always will be. Is the. Many people would much rather hear Jesus might be one of the. Many say, how dare anyone claim Jesus is the? And many more ask, how can you know for sure? The first time Linus made that statement, 1965, I was 2 years old. I'm 58 now. That means, since leaving the toddler stage, I spent about a third of my life not knowing or not caring what Linus was talking about. I don't want to forget those days, because I don't want to lose touch with or grow cold to people who don't know or don't care what he was talking about. And Christmas is 3 weeks away. And that opens a rare annual window when many people are at least open to talking about faith in ways they aren't the rest of the year. As Pastor Tim Keller put it, every year our increasingly secular Western society becomes more unaware of its own historical roots, many of which are the fundamentals of the Christian faith. Yet, once a year at Christmas, these basic truths become a bit more accessible to an enormous audience. And that's why I thought it would be good to spend some time looking at some of the main beliefs out there. Not to arm or equip anyone to do battle or win someone, but to try to feed our understanding of where various people are coming from and why, and how we might be able to build bridges. Well, let's start with the belief that God simply isn't. That's atheism. It comes from the Latin word atheos. A, or a, means no or not. Theos means God. So, atheos, no God. Fewer than 4% of adults in this country consider themselves atheists. 4%. One of the most prominent atheists in the world is Richard Dawkins, author of the best-selling book, The God Delusion. This is one of his famous quotes. Faith is the great cop-out, the great excuse to evade the need to think and evaluate evidence. Faith, he said, is belief in spite of, even perhaps because of, the lack of evidence. He also said, I'm against religion, because it teaches us how to be satisfied with not understanding the world. I think Luke would be somewhere between puzzled and offended by that. Look again at how Luke saw his most important research project. Accounts about the events that have been fulfilled among us. Eyewitness reports. carefully investigated everything, you can be certain of the truth of everything you were taught. See, I don't think Luke would be surprised to see recent research showing over half the people in the field of science in the U.S. believe in some form of higher power or deity. 1 in every 3 of them say they believe in God. See, contrary to a lot of vocal criticism out there, many of us Christians and pastors are very pro-science. Even though they lived 4 centuries apart, I would love to hear a conversation between Richard Dawkins and, say, Blaise Pascal, one of the most well-respected mathematicians and scientists in history. The subtitle to his most famous book is The Misery of Man Without God. And he's the one behind the famous saying about there being a God-shaped hole in the human heart that only God can fill. And as I get to know about Dawkins, my sadness for him grows. One of the saddest things I've heard was him answering this question: doesn't your worldview lead you to be depressed? Well, Dawkins answered, I don't feel depressed about it. The universe is bleak, cold, and empty. That sounds kind of depressing, but anyway, I don't feel depressed about it. The universe is bleak, cold, and empty, but so what? Well, that actually sounds more like one of atheism's close cousins, what I call apatheism. Apatheists don't care whether there is or isn't a God. And some people swing to another extreme form of apatheism, to anti-theism. Not only don't they believe in God, they often seem angry about people who do believe in God. The core belief of an atheist, an apatheist, or an anti-theist is you're born, you live, you get or you endure as much as possible along the way, then you die. End of story. Even though it's been more than 30 years, I still remember not being able to shake one nagging question about that belief. If atheism is true, and there is no God, why are most people not okay with that? If we just are, and then we just aren't, why is there something inside us that longs for there to be more? And that's why a lot of people are open to deism. That's the belief that some form of God made the world, but then kind of left. Mostly because bad, evil, or at least messed up people did too many bad, evil, or messed up things. It's kind of like this God made a watch and wound it up and then just let it go. This deist God doesn't pay attention to individuals, except for maybe a few really, really good ones, but they'll never balance out all the bad. Deism says this God would prefer that you get better and do good things, but he's not coming to help, or he isn't able to help, and when you die, he may or may not be there. Al Pacino played Satan in the movie The Devil's Advocate, where he called God an absentee landlord. That's kind of what the deists would call him. If deism is true, and a God created things and then kind of abandoned the project, why would the things he created, especially people, long for there to be more? Where do they all go in the end, and what happens to this God? There are other isms that are closely related, various forms of what is called pantheism. Pan, the word meant all, and back to theos, God. So, as one prominent pantheist put it, God is everything and everything is God. The world is either identical with God or in some way a self-expression of his nature. Some believe that rather than everything being God, God is in everything, but as a force, as an energy. Pantheism, in its various forms, rejects the idea of a personal creator God, and pantheists believe the universe has existed forever, or it originated out of nothing. Some believe it began with a huge explosion, or when two things that had always existed united together in some way and triggered a chain of events that led to life as we see it. These are the opening lines on the webpage for the World Pantheist Movement. Do you feel a deep sense of peace, belonging, and gratitude in nature? Are you blown away by a clear night sky filled with stars and galaxies? Do you say things like, forests are my cathedrals, or the universe is my higher power? Then you may well be a scientific pantheist. Scientific pantheism focuses on saving the planet rather than saving souls. It encourages you to make the most and best of your one life here. It values reason and the scientific method over adherence to ancient scriptures. I find that last line particularly interesting, especially when you see how Dr. Luke carefully followed the scientific method and used extreme amounts of reason. And even though it acknowledges the breathtakingly beautiful complexity of nature and the universe, pantheism essentially says it all just happened. Famous astrophysicist Fred Hoyle was a staunch atheist, but even he said that would be like a Boeing 747 being made by a hurricane blowing through a junkyard. I appreciate honesty like that. My favorite example of it was Nobel Prize winning scientist George Wald, who said, "There are only two possibilities as to how life arose. One is spontaneous generation arising to evolution. The other is a supernatural creative act of God. There is no third possibility. Spontaneous generation, that life arose from non-living matter, was scientifically disproved 120 years ago by Louis Pasteur and others." Now, remember, this was, I think, in the 60s. He went on to say that leaves us with only one possible conclusion. Life arose as a creative act of God. I will not accept that philosophically because I do not want to believe in God. Therefore, I choose to believe in that which I know is scientifically impossible. And that's atheism, pantheism, and deism. Theism is the belief that there is a God. Now, that can be monotheism, one God, like Judaism or Islam, or it can be polytheism, many gods, like Mormonism or Hinduism. Theists believe there is a difference between creator and creation. The creator is God who made creation. And God is holy and righteous and good, and when we die, we're going to stand before God to give an account. And we have sinned, so we're all guilty. Again, this is theism. But for theists, there's no savior. You have to save yourself. That is religion. Pray 5 times a day. Go to Mecca. Islam. Obey the moral law. Judaism. Knock on enough doors to tell enough people about God. Jehovah's Witnesses. Do what needs to be done to transition from being a person to being a God. Mormon. Reincarnate and suffer and reincarnate and suffer enough times until you pay God back. Religion and theism are pretty much the same thing. Both teach God is basically like a distant, scowling, pointed finger rule keeper. And we're going to give an account to him, so do better and try harder. Religion, theism, takes you one of two directions: pride or despair. Pride comes for religious people who feel like they're doing a good job. I do good things, I'm a good person. At least I'm better than I used to be, and I'm definitely better than the really bad people. Despair comes for religious people who say, I try to do all the stuff, but sometimes I don't do very well, and I keep forgetting to do the things on the list, and I end up doing things that are definitely not on the list. The God of theism, or religion, is basically only there to blow a whistle and call fouls. You would never picture him with a loving arm around your shoulder. People don't typically turn to the God of theism or religion. They turn from him. They don't cry out to him. They hide from him. And that was me in my early 20s until something inside me began to stir. It was a longing. It was a searching for something. Although I didn't have a clue what, and I didn't have any idea the something was actually someone. I began experimenting with a wide variety of forms of all the things I mentioned. And I found some things in each that did connect with something inside, but with each, something deeper eventually said, in one way or another, no, that isn't it. It was kind of like the band U2 wrote that one song just for me in the late 80s, because I still hadn't found what I was looking for. Well, after years of going different distances down pretty much every path you could explore, my heart began to be opened to what Linus had been telling me every year in December. I knew the Bible, and I knew a song about it, that said the words were spoken to poor shepherds in fields as they lay. And by God's amazing grace, I began to hear them spoken to me. For unto you is born Savior. He is Christ the Lord. Unto you, unto me, unto us. He came. He comes. God came. God is here. Emmanuel. God with us. Not us having to work our way to him. That's religion. This is something very different. This God, the God,